Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Ontario Science Centre live stream. Today's topic is Icy Cool Science. My name is Donna Francis, and I'm so happy to have you all here for today's live stream. I'd like to introduce our very special guest for today. Her name is Alison Criscitiello. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you so much. I'm real excited to be here.
Alison Criscitiello is the director of the Canadian Ice Core Lab at the University of Alberta and an adjunct assistant professor at the University of Calgary. She has degrees in earth and environmental science, geophysics, and the first PhD in glaciology ever awarded by MIT. Her work is all about studying the history of sea ice in polar regions by studying ice core chemistry. She is also an alpine guide, an experienced mountaineer, and the founder of Girls on Ice Canada organization. We're so looking forward to having you take our science interviewers on a trip to the icy heights of mountains and deep into glaciers. Now, before we begin, as part of our discussion today, we will feature the land. We'll talk about land being explored. We'll look at land features to discover the history and the hidden stories that they tell. So it's only appropriate that we take time to acknowledge the land that we are on and the role of Indigenous peoples who have been and continue to be caretakers of the land. The Ontario Science Centre acknowledges that the place where I am speaking from is on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Chippewa, as well as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Wendat peoples. And it is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Alison, where are you speaking to us from?
I'm speaking to you from Edmonton, Alberta.
All right. So we acknowledge that the place where Alison is speaking from is on the traditional territory of the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota, Tsuut'ina, and the Dene peoples. Similarly, it is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We are settlers on Turtle Island, and in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we commit to respect, listen, learn, and support Indigenous peoples with whom we share this land and who have cared for this land since time immemorial. And I encourage all of you watching to find out the history of the land that you are on as well. So a huge part of the land where we live is the conditions of the place where we are. Today's topic is icy cold science. Alison is a glaciologist, a scientist who studies ice and glaciers. So today I am wondering from the audience, where are you joining us from? And is there any snow, ice, cold where you are? If you could just put that in the chat, then we'll get a better sense of how everyone is feeling today, if you're warm, if you're cold, as well as where you're joining us from. So right now where I am in Toronto, it's just starting to snow right now. Very little. We've got like just a little dusting of snow. Alison, what is it like right now where you are?
I'm so glad you asked. It's a total mess because it's right around freezing here. So it snowed a bunch a couple of weeks ago, and now it's raining and it's freezing, like it's freezing rain. So there's a couple inches of ice on everything right now.
Oh, that is a really challenging situation. Let me see where folks are joining us from. I see that there's some people from Smithville, Ontario, where it's snowing. There's someone from Creemore as well, from Oakville. So all very similar to where I am right now, where it's chilly and there is a little bit of snow. So I think we're all in good company, and I'd have to say I'm pretty happy that we don't have that freezing rain because that is a serious challenge. So let's start off with a quick look at where we can find things like snow, frozen water on Earth. Um, for any viewers, if you know of some places, can you name some places where you could find frozen water on Earth? Please put it in the chat, and we'll see if you're able to come up with the same sort of numbers of places that we'll be discussing. So I'm going to start off with a quick slide that refers to what might be a new word for a few people. So let's bring up that slide. And the word on that slide is cryosphere. So we can break that down into two parts. So cryo means cold, and sphere refers to the shape of the Earth. So everything on this slide is showing where you can find frozen water on Earth. I'd like to start off by saying, this image shows a lot of those different places. I'm looking to see if anyone has put in the chat any of the places that they're thinking of when they think of frozen water on Earth. I'll give it a little bit more time to see that.
There's a lot of good ones.
Oh, yeah, I'm seeing some now. Antarctica, North Pole, Brantford, South Pole, Alaska. So those are some good ones to start off with. Alison, can you show us maybe some pictures of different places where you've studied ice?
I can. And I also wanted to point out that this word, the cryosphere, there's so many great answers here. And some of these places we commonly think of, like the big ice sheets on Earth, Antarctica, Greenland. But the cryosphere does also encapsulate other frozen parts of our planet, like all the other glaciers on Earth, some of which actually sit on the equator. And sea ice is also part of the cryosphere, the frozen parts of our Earth. And so is sea ice, which is floating on the ocean surface, but it's also part of the cryosphere. So you got a lot of them here, and it's nice to think about these other frozen parts of our planet. I would love to show you parts of the cryosphere that I work in. The next slide is a beautiful iceberg. I took this photo in the Ross Sea on my way down to the mainland of Antarctica. And this is an area of Antarctica I worked for many years along the Amundsen coast of West Antarctica. If you look at a map, that's the general area I was headed toward, where I took this iceberg photo. And this is an area that's very important to our climate system, to sea level, because the West Antarctic ice sheet is enormous and contains a huge amount of seawater equivalent, or ice that's locked up. The fresh water that's locked up in ice that could be released into the oceans. So I've studied in this area for years. The next photo I thought I would show you is a really interesting one, and it kind of pulls in this interesting parts of the cryosphere that I like to think about. This photo was from an adventure, actually. It wasn't from a scientific expedition. And you can see 3 cyclists, I'm one of them, and we were biking from Dawson to Tuktoyaktuk in the Northwest Territories. And this photo actually is the Mackenzie River. So we were biking on the frozen Mackenzie River. Wow. And it was quite the adventure. And so this is called an ice road, which actually no longer exists. It's why we went there to bike it. It was the last year that this ice road was in existence. And the next photo shows where the Mackenzie River actually meets the Arctic Ocean. So this is a photo of us biking on the frozen Arctic Ocean, which was snowplowed and graded, not for us, but for trucks and for moving supplies and food up to northern communities. But we biked on that ice road. So there was frozen kelp under us and fish, and it was very scary to me. I'm used to being over only ice, not ice and then water.
Wow, those are incredible photos.
Thanks. Yeah. And the next photo is from somewhere else that I've worked over the last several years. It's a beautiful part of Canada's north. This ice field is called Prince of Wales ice field. If anyone's looking at a map to find all these places, it's on Ellesmere Island in Nunavut. And that ice core that's laid out on the ground there, we laid it out because we were taking digital images of it, taking photographs of it, which you can see the two scientists doing there. And you can also see very clearly in the photo melt layers, those kind of ice layers within what looks more like snow. And
like the clear parts, right?
Exactly, yeah, the clear parts. Those are summer melt layers. So even pretty far north in the Canadian high Arctic, there is melt in the middle of the summer season, and we're starting to see this when we're drilling ice cores to pull out climate records. Now, the next photo, I took this past May up on Mount Logan, which is Canada's highest peak. And I have a project there I'll talk a little more about in a bit, but this is one of my very favorite projects I've ever been a part of. And the image here was on our way up, skiing up through an ice fall toward the summit plateau of Mount Logan, where we're doing the science way up high on the mountain. And we have to actually climb and ski up there because it's so high. Our bodies have to go up in altitude slowly to acclimatize. We can't just fly up to 19,000 feet. We have to go up slowly. Hence us skiing slowly through these mazes of ice falls to get up to where we're doing the science. And I've got a last photo to show you of a current exciting project, which is not too far from where I showed you that Prince of Wales picture. This is Devon Ice Cap on Devon Island, sort of just south of Ellesmere. And what you can see in this photo behind us is there's a snowmobile, and then it's pulling two sleds, a big sled that has a thing sticking up on it, and then a smaller sled behind it. And this project is really unique. That system in the sled is a radar system, which allows us to look at the internal layers, stratigraphy of the ice itself, all the way down to the bedrock below, which in this point is about 700 meters below the ice. So there's about 700 meters of ice with bedrock below it. And the reason we were pulling radar around here, trying to see down below our feet and what's happening really, really deep under the ice, is because there is liquid water. There's a subglacial lake below this ice cap. So we've been investigating what that's all about, all sorts of different parameters of this lake before, hopefully someday in years, drilling down there to see what's actually there in the lake. So there's a little overview of a few current projects I'm pretty excited about.
Wow, all of those different places on Earth that have ice. That's incredible. Going back to one of your previous images where, and it's also in the title slide, where you're holding this cylinder of ice. It's so fabulous. Can you tell us a bit more about that and what it is?
Yes. I was in that title slide, I'm holding up a meter-long piece of ice. I was standing in the Canadian high Arctic, and there's no visible melt layers in that one. There it is. But this is actually what it looks like often when we're drilling shallow cores, just sort of 20-meter kind of thing, where we're landing on the surface of an ice cap, digging a quick pit so that we can not lean over all day and stand and process the ice and try to pull up climate records that are sort of decades long. That's what this particular image was from. And I took this photo of myself. I was alone on this one. Typically, that's not normal, but sometimes to really cut down on time and fuel that we use to get around and cost and all these things, take very, very small teams if possible. And in this particular case, I was drilling alone. So I had a camera on myself, and that was a still from the camera, from the video.
That's quite the selfie. Yeah.
Thank you. I was like, well, if a polar bear comes, I'd like people to know what happened.
A record of that. Yes. Can you tell us some more about that? Like, why do you drill ice cores?
Yes.
How do you do it?
Yes, I would love to. There's an image in the next slide that shows a close-up on the left-hand side there of a very deep part of the West Arctic ice sheet. You can see the ice is extremely clear. It's very, very compressed, beautiful ice. And on the right-hand side, that was a snow pit from the same general area in West Antarctica that we dug down, and you can see the layering there. Now, why do we go through all this trouble? It is extremely costly and expensive. It uses fuel to do this kind of science. Why are we doing it? And the real reason is that ice cores, maybe only in addition to sediment cores, which are similar in a lot of ways, are our only opportunity to look at really, really long-term climate histories on Earth. Satellites were put into our atmosphere in the early 70s, and since then we have this whole incredible what we call instrumental or observational network. But before the 70s, before we had these snapshots of everything that's happening on the planet, we don't know what sea ice looked like. We don't know how big certain ice caps and glaciers were, and especially over really long time periods. There's not that many ways to investigate the history of our Earth. And ice cores are truly one of the most powerful tools for doing that. We have currently the longest ice core record, which I think will be beaten in the next several years, but the longest one right now is 800,000 years long. So this is a length, of course, that humans can't observe. We don't have observational records anywhere near that long, and so this is our way at understanding long-term history of the Earth's climate.
Wow, so those ice cores are literally like little time machines.
Little time machines, exactly.
Going back in time to see what things were like.
Totally.
Okay, keep telling us some more.
Okay, so I want to tell you how. I just gave you a very overview of why. Now, in terms of the how, the next slide shows an image of what's called the Canadian Eclipse drill, and this is what we consider an intermediate depth drill. It goes to about 350 meters deep. And the thing that people commonly ask is, okay, if you drill a 300 meter deep core, how do you do that? Do you pull it all up at once? We drill it a meter at a time. And so the drill is shown in that left-hand photo. This is a photo from May in the Yukon. It's shown in this horizontal position, which is how we retrieve the ice. We pull it out of the drill barrel. But the drill itself is a tipping tower drill, meaning that the entire thing swings to a vertical position to drill. And then when we're done drilling our meter, we pull it back up to the surface and then swing it back like this so that we can pull the ice out of the end. And the right-hand side shows what the cutting head of that drill looks like. And it's actually pretty simple. It just has some cutters on it. It has these things called shoes, which are just basically spacers that we can change the thickness of as we drill down. And it changes how sort of aggressively we're cutting, how many revolutions per minute the drill does, which we change based on the ice and snow density. There's that spiral that goes up the tube called a flight. And that's what allows the drill to not get stuck, because when you're drilling, you create all this snow dust, the same as if you were cutting a piece of wood on a saw, you create all this sawdust. It's exactly the same. We create all this snow dust, and it would jam up the whole drill if it couldn't somehow get up and out of the hole. So that's what those flights are. It allows that snow dust to travel up the drill as the drill goes down, and it doesn't all just bunch up at the bottom and clog the drill and make it get stuck. And perhaps if one can have a favorite part of a drill, which I think I do, my very favorite part of this drill is that little thing called a core dog. And it's just this little spring-loaded mechanism. It's just got a spring and like a little stainless steel sharp door. And all it does is, as you're drilling down, they just get pressed against the edge of the ice. But when you stop drilling and you want to pull the drill back up, those little spring-loaded core dogs bite just a millimeter or two into the ice. And then that is the only thing holding the ice in the barrel for its whole journey back up the borehole, which is actually a little bit scary, but they very rarely fail. So, it's a simple mechanical drill, but that's kind of what it looks like. And if you go to the next slide, I'm going to show you a quick sped up video of using this drill in Antarctica. And we were about 300 meters deep here. So here is that drill in its horizontal ice retrieving position. And I'm running it backwards right now because when we're that deep, we have to add a drilling fluid to the borehole so that the ice doesn't shatter from the change in pressure when we pluck it from depth and bring it to the surface. So instead of seeing snow dust coming out in this particular example, it kind of looks like slush because there's a drilling fluid added to it. But it's this, it's an interesting fluid. But anyhow, so next, after we get all that slush out, we pull that inner barrel out. You can see the flights on it there. And we disconnect it from the rest of the drill. And we bring it over to what we always set up, which is a core processing line on the right-hand side here in this drill tent. And then there's a little plug of those snow chips at the top too. Hooray! And there's our meter of ice. So that whole thing, everything that just happened, we do for every single meter of ice that we retrieve. So we do it over and over and over. So as you can imagine, at the, when you start drilling at the beginning of your season, you could drill maybe 30 meters at a time in a day. I mean, but when you're down around 300 meters, you can only drill a couple meters in a day because the drill has to travel all the way down to drill its meter. Now, the next slide shows the other kind of drill that was used in the research that I'm showing you today, and it's a shallow system. We call it a Kovacs. It can only go about 30 meters, but the super cool thing about this is that we can use it in a clean mode, meaning that you can drill completely manually. You can stick just like a T-handle on the top of it and manually drill it down and then manually pull the whole thing back up, which is super powerful when we are interested in looking at environmental contaminants to remote ice caps where we don't want any fuel, oil, gas, anything synthetic anywhere near our drill hole. So this is a wonderful drill for that. And what you can see is it's basically a pared down version of that previous drill. It's just that inner barrel. You can see those flights. It's just that inner barrel that we're manually drilling down. So the next video shows this drill in action on Ellesmere Island. And we drilled about as deep as this particular one will go, 25 meters. What you can see here is that instead of a cable and a winch, we're using our muscles and stainless steel pieces of pipe instead of a cable that we're just adding meter by meter and then pulling out meter by meter. So here we've got a little core processing pit over there where our friend is measuring, weighing, and packaging up the ice on the side. We've just pulled the drill up and retrieved that meter, and then we go ahead and send it back down the hole again and manually add these pieces of pipe until we get back down and start drilling all over again. So this is what both drills look like in the field, and that's kind of, the how, I suppose.
I see a question that someone has asked from McKinnon Public School. They're asking, how much ice can the Canadian Eclipse drill hold? Do both of those drills hold the same amount of ice? And how long does the ice take to melt when it's taken out?
Nice. Okay. Yes, they actually do. The drill barrel itself, which is the only part that holds ice, is basically the same. If you really maxed it out, if by some miracle you didn't create snow chips, you could get 1.5 meters. But generally, we retrieve 1 meter at a time with both of these drills. Now, what's the melting part of the question?
Oh, how long does the ice take to melt when you take it out of the drill? Maybe the next slides will cover that conversation.
Yeah, come back to me if I don't answer what you're getting at with that one, because I was going to show you next the Ice Core Lab, which is where the melting happens. So as beautiful and exciting as the field is, the point of all of this is to get all that ice back frozen, of course, here to the Canadian Ice Core Lab, which is at University of Alberta. And the lab itself, it's 3 rooms. I'm showing you the 2 cold rooms. It's sectioned into 3 rooms. The one on the left-hand side in this image is the working freezer. So it's at a toasty about minus 25 C. And this room, here's my wood cutting analogy once again. It basically is a wood shop. It's if you're a woodworker, you'll recognize those. It says Laguna on it. There's 3 bandsaws along the left-hand side of that room, and those are normal wood cutting bandsaws that we've just changed the parts out on so that they work really nicely in cold temperatures. But they are dedicated, of course, only to cutting polar snow and ice. On the right-hand side in the front, there's a planer that gives you really, really crisp, clear, beautiful, flat surfaces on ice cores, which is something we need to be able to do to image them really well. And then you can't quite see it, but behind me there are 2 imaging systems which are made specifically for looking at the internal structure of ice and bubbles, capturing melt layers, things like that. So that whole room is dedicated to cutting and imaging ice. And then that room on the right is what we call our ice library. It's the archive where we store ice over longer periods. And that room is closer to minus 40, which is the temperature at which Fahrenheit and Celsius cross. And we store ice pretty cold to make sure that nothing migrates within the ice chemically or within the tiny air bubbles that are trapped in the ice. And then we, of course, also have an analytical room. I didn't show you. It's just, I think it's beautiful, but it's just a lot of analytical instruments for measuring liquid chemistry. So that's where all the real work actually happens once we get the ice back here.
Nice. So I really want to ask you this next question about why you're so passionate about ice. How did you get into this field? Why are you a glaciologist?
Well, yeah, I guess I'm not entirely sure. I grew up in Boston, but I have some photos from growing up on the next slide. I largely credit what I do today to the fact that I'm an identical twin, and from very, very young, we were both pretty enamored with winter and snow sports and exploring everywhere within striking distance from where we grew up together. And we did a lot of stuff pretty young. I don't know, because we were twins and our parents thought if we were together, we'd be fine. So we went off adventuring in New England in the winters, starting pretty young. And I think that's where the seeds of it came from. And I in the next slide is some photos from when I was a climbing ranger. One of the very first things I did after my undergraduate, which was in earth science, I was already pretty hooked on learning more about the earth. Was I became a climbing ranger in the U.S. National Park Service, and I was working and living on glaciers and in these beautiful places that I felt very, very drawn to. The next one being perhaps my very, very favorite place that I've ever lived. This is Mount Olympus in Washington State. And I loved working there and working in the Park Service, but over a few years, I realized, okay, I really want to study these places that I love to be, and I love to adventure and climb and ski. So I went back to graduate school then to try to understand these landscapes better, really.
Nice. And that makes me, I'm curious for our viewers as well, what our viewers like to do outdoors, and especially outside in the snow and cold. Like, can you imagine yourself doing these same things that Alison did when she was little and when she's doing right now? So if you have a response to that, please put that in the chat, and we can understand how much you guys love snow and ice too. So for the next part of this, I'm just looking at the time, and I want to know about your current research. Can you tell us just a little bit about some of the current research that you have?
I can, and I'll be cognizant of the time too. On the next slide is a bunch of photos from this past April, and these are from a project that's on Snow Dome on the Columbia ice field, which is actually only a few hours from where I'm sitting right now. And this particular project is, even though it looks so beautiful and pristine, which it is, we're actually up there drilling ice cores because we're looking at environmental contaminants that are locked up in the snow and ice up there that may melt out, since temperatures are starting to rise up there, into downstream ecosystems and drinking water. This area is actually the source of drinking water for where I am sitting right now. So there's a lot of interest in things that may be melting out of the snowpack over the next few years. And the next photo is also from that same site and can show, this is another beautiful melt layer picture, beautiful and sad, I suppose. I'm holding up a piece of core that has an obvious melt layer in it, that really clear, that clear stripe in the core. And again, this project really is, it's one of my first forays into looking at contaminants that may impact drinking water and ecosystems. The second of three projects I just thought I would highlight is the one I mentioned earlier, which is Mount Logan. And the next picture, the next few pictures here show images, again, from getting up to the point on the summit plateau where we're doing the science. And the reason we're working here is because outside of the polar regions, there are not that many places on the planet where it's cold enough and high enough and all the right conditions exist to preserve ice without any melt, even in the height of summer. And also sort of have a catchment, like a morphology that's just right for capturing ice and allowing us to drill it. And Mount Logan's one of them. So we expect extremely old ice to exist on Logan's summit plateau. One more picture of what this area looks like in the next photo, which was on our way up. The ice up there is, again, for a non-polar area, is very thick. It's hundreds of meters thick and may contain ice that's about 30,000 years old, which is remarkable for ice outside of the poles. The next slide is from last May when we were up on Mount Logan doing all the stuff we do to locate ice core sites. The two main things are pulling a radar system around, which I described to you earlier. You can see that really well in the top left photo, pulling around this radar system to look at the internal layering of the ice so we can locate the ideal drilling location. And we also installed a weather station. You can see that on the bottom left, which is something we like to do when we can, because it's wonderful to have really local meteorological data to pair with our more recent years of climate record from the ice core. And this actually is North America's highest weather station at 18,500 feet on Mount Logan.
Nice.
Yeah, it was. We'll see if it's still there in May. It's very windy. And then lastly, the next slide is from Devon Ice Cap, where I showed you some beautiful photos before. And this is part of that project where we're investigating that subglacial lake that's far beneath the surface. The next photo I just like because, we never ever know what's beneath the ice. People ask that all the time too. What kind of, do you ever pull living things out? What kind of things do you hit? But this subglacial lake is perhaps one of the most interesting things that I've ever worked on from more of a biology standpoint. So that's an ongoing project right now as well.
There is actually, just speaking exactly on that, from MacWendam Public School, they're asking, do you ever find organisms in the ice? And then Judy Bate is asking, do you find semblance of life in the ice that you retrieve? So very similar questions.
Mm-hmm. Yes, this isn't a sort of sub area that I work on, but some people focus their research entirely on looking at DNA within ice cores. That is a whole area of ice core science.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. So I think one last question before we go to asking some more questions from the audience.
Sure.
I just wanted to ask you to tell us about Girls on Ice.
Oh, sure. That's right. Yep, there's a last slide here, which is an image from the program that you're asking about. Girls on Ice Canada is a program that I started with a couple other Canadian women, glaciologists, in fact. And this program is for female identifying 16 and 17-year-olds in Canada. It is sort of a two-pronged program, and it's 2 weeks long. And the two prongs are really mountaineering and self-sufficiency in mountain environments and mountain science, glaciology. So this program is run in Revelstoke National Park up at a hut, called a Sulkin Hut. And like I said, it's 2 weeks long, and it culminates in all of the participants doing a science project that they present at the end, and also climbing a glaciated peak, which is no small feat. And we really, really try to get participants from all provinces and territories from all across Canada. And oh boy, sorry if you can hear that. So it's a very unique program.
It sounds wonderful. I mean, if I could travel back in time and be a 16 or 17-year-old, that sounds like it would be just the most amazing thing ever. I definitely would want to apply to that. And I'm hoping that some of our viewers might, if that's something that interests you, that you might look that up and find out more about that as well. So I'm going to look through, because there are so many wonderful questions that are here, and it's a great time for Alison to address some of these questions. I see one here from asking, how many ice cores are in the library? How many do you have altogether?
I'm so glad you asked. I meant to mention that. Right now, we have 1.5 kilometers of ice in there.
Whoa.
In those tubes, each tube holds a meter. So there's 1.5 kilometers of ice. Almost all of it is from the Canadian high Arctic. But there's some Yukon ice in there. There's Canadian Rockies ice from Snow Dome in there. And I'd have to say it's probably about 8 locations that are in the archive right now.
Oh, it's amazing. I'm looking at some other ones. I see that we heard from the viewers all the different things that they like to do in the snow, from building snowmen to skiing and snowboarding and skating, rolling in the snow. That's always a good one. Sledding. Yeah,
I love all these things too.
Building houses in snow piles. So we have a lot of viewers who are really enjoying that cold weather. Here's a great question. Are the melt layers good or bad?
Ooh. That's a really good question. Okay, they're bad. So that's a really good question. Like reviewers of papers ask that question when you try to publish papers on ice core records that have melt in them, because what melt does is, as you can imagine, if you have snow, it has lots of spaces between the snow crystals. If you get melt at the surface, it percolates down between those snow crystals, and then when it gets cold again, but when it's back below freezing, it'll refreeze. So if you're imagining this process happening and you're interested in chemistry, with the climate records that are preserved in that snowpack, all of that chemistry is being redistributed within the snowpack. So it basically destroys your time scale. Like, you have no way to date the ice, which everything is dependent on. You have to be able to date the layers of the ice. And it's redistributing all of these different ions, these different, things in the liquid chemistry of the ice that we care about so much. So in fact, the reason that question is so important is because melt has actually driven the priority of the places we're drilling right now, because there are places, Snow Dome is one of them, the Columbia ice field. There are places that we know hold really valuable climate records, and if we don't drill them soon, in the next decade or so, those climate records will be lost because of melt. So it's added some urgency to the job.
Wow,
Awesome question.
making your job even more important. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Just looking to see some of the other ones that are here. A few people actually asked with regards to preparing to work in the cold, like how many layers of coats and clothing do you need while you're working in the Arctic? But then also in your ice core lab, how difficult is it to work when it's so cold inside? And how do you get your fingers to work?
Yeah, awesome. Maybe something in here will be useful for everyone who's watching from cold places. So I would say actually often it's colder working in the lab here than in the field, because when you're in the field, it's somewhat physical work, and at the very least you're moving around. But when you're standing at one of those saws that I showed you, just sawing ice, you're basically standing still for hours, which is so much colder than when you're in the field moving around and get your heart rate up. And so I find the freezer work, the ice core lab work, quite cold. And I guess there's a couple things I've learned over time. It's easy to put on lots of down layers, and I have a big down suit. It's very warm and it keeps your body warm. But hands and feet are always really hard. And, even if you're out building a snowman in the middle of the winter, right, your hands and feet get cold the first. And I have given in, and I now rely very heavily on heated gloves and heated socks. And they have completely saved my life. So that's what I do now to make it work.
That's a great pro tip. I love it. So I think we are just about wrapping up with this. I wanted to see, I'm looking to see if there's one last question that we might want to take. But in the interim, I'd like to remind everyone about the Planet Ice exhibition that is at the Ontario Science Centre. If we don't get around to all of your questions, there's still more to explore here at the Ontario Science Centre with regards to ice and ice ages, to satisfy your curiosity. And I think the last question I'm going to go for is, what makes you the most happy about your job? What do you like the most? What's the coolest thing you've ever found? That's the last question.
Just one thing?
It's always hard to narrow it down, isn't it? Yeah.
This makes me sound old. I think actually right now, the thing that makes me the most excited is watching new, younger students get really hooked on ice core science. Like I guess I've done it for enough years that, I can be in these beautiful places and I'm not as wowed anymore. But when I go back to places I've worked for years with someone who's never been there, and then see their excitement and see it again kind of new through their eyes, it's just so, it's inspiring all over again to me, and it's really refreshing. That's what I would say right now.
Wonderful. Passing that torch along. Well, hopefully with today's live stream, you've ignited that fire and that desire to explore ice and become a glaciologist in at least one of our audience members. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed. We'll hear that you inspired some more folks to look at the climate and to study ice. I really want to thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to thank the audience as well for joining us for this live stream. Our next live stream will be in January, and I hope that you'll come back and join us for that. It's been so wonderful having you here with us, sharing all those gorgeous images with us and all of your knowledge about ice, and discovering more about glaciology too. Thanks so much, Alison.
Thank you so much. And thanks for the wonderful questions.
Yeah.